On January 7th, 37-year-old Renee Good was shot and killed by an ICE officer blocks away from where George Floyd was murdered in 2020. Immediately afterwards, federal officials labeled the incident as an act of domestic terrorism, claiming Good had viciously run over an officer with her car and he had acted in self-defense. But as more perspectives, angles, and videos of that event emerged, local leaders, witnesses countered that narrative as propaganda. Videos of that shooting went viral, sparked protests in that city and throughout the United States. It's an event that has left many people trying to figure out how the truth of a shooting can be so different depending on who is watching that video. I'm Nicole Huck, and today on Blue Sky, we're talking about the ways we see video evidence and how technical manipulations like slow motion can distort our perception of reality. We'll hear about what factors go into how someone interprets what they see on video, and we'll examine how the emergence of generative AI and manipulated images are showing a new level of public distrust in visual records of conflict. In an age of generative AI, how can we trust what our eyes see? We want to hear from you. What do you think determines how a person interprets what they see on video? And how do you assess the truth of what you see? You can call 1-800-716-2221 or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Brian McQuinn is the co-director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence, Data, and Conflict. He's also an associate professor at the University of Regina's Department of Politics and International Studies. He's been a regular to the CBC here. And Brian, welcome back to Blue Sky.
Pleasure to be here.
Sandra Ristovska is an associate professor of media studies with a courtesy appointment in law at the University of Colorado Boulder. She's also the founding director of the Visual Evidence Lab. Sandra, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm curious both. I'm sure everybody has seen the video of the shooting of Renee Good. What was your reaction to seeing how different narratives about this event emerged? Brian, maybe I'll start with you.
I think it sort of falls into a trend that we've been obviously seeing for years. It's always important to take a step back and understand these conflicts and what's happening as the sort of continued polarization and increased level of violence and violent rhetoric within the societies that, we live in, especially in the United States. And so we often talk about, the veracity of a certain video. Often it doesn't really matter, and we'll probably get into this more, and my colleague obviously has a lot to add on that. But it no longer really matters what you see or what is there. It is how are you signaling your loyalty to the communities that you are part of. And so that's really what this becomes about. It's about identity. It's no longer about whether something is real or not. It's how do we really show ourselves to be in whichever camp that's there.
And Sandra, you're in Colorado. You probably have a much different perspective than we do, even watching it here from here in Canada. But what do you make of what you've been seeing coming out of this?
Yes, I would just say that seeing images has always been more than just, what meets the eye. Because as my colleague was just talking about, right, who we are, what our experiences are, what our worldviews have always bared on how we interpret images. So there is nothing new there. There are multiple factors, and maybe we'll talk about that. Now, what's interesting about this case is there is not just one video, there are multiple videos. So one of the first videos that we saw when officials put forward their official narrative of what has happened was that Renee Good had attempted to hit the police officers, and that, in fact, his safety was endangered. And even at first, I believe we heard that he might have been in the hospital. Now, the first video that we saw, it's actually very hard to figure it out what's happening because the angle from which it was shot, it was unclear what's happening. But since then, multiple other videos have emerged. So we got a video that have went viral from a bystander who is there on the street where the shooting and the killing is happening. So we see from that perspective. There was another bystander video from across the street, somebody recording from a very different perspective. And then recently we saw a video emerging from the cell phone recording of the ICE officer himself. And so when we see all of those videos from multiple angles and perspectives, they actually cast doubt on the official narrative. And so, evidentiary, it's not as clear cut as to what has happened as we were first led to believe by the official narratives.
I want to talk about that last video, the one that was released from the perspective of the actual ICE agent. It was that perhaps is the most interesting in terms of different people seeing different things from that video. Brian, can you pick up on maybe what the motivation for releasing that video was and how that's actually played out?
I think in many ways what we see from this administration, and I don't want to get too political with it, is sort of the idea of sort of propaganda, or at least videos, and the sort of sensationalism of this is really central to what they're doing. And this is one of the things that I think Donald Trump is exceptionally good at is the way in which spectacle is used from a political perspective. My sense is that, as always with this, and my colleague I think is 100% correct, what you see out of a video really is determined by what you bring to that video. Now, obviously, we have examples where things are quite different, but the motivation to me, I think, escapes me, other than the fact that I think it would have got out anyways. And so it really does sort of bring in a different set of perspectives that I think makes the entire situation much clearer and I think the outcome much more dubious.
Sandra, you work with the courts often, with the use of video in legal proceedings. If you're looking just through a legal lens at these videos, how are you seeing things differently than perhaps I am?
So I would say I'm a visual communication scholar, right? I'm not a legal scholar. So where I work with courts, judges, and attorneys is to kind of set up clear criteria and guidelines for how video is used as evidence in court. Because when video was initially introduced into courtrooms, it was assumed to be the kind of this objective witness that is, you have video and things are very clear. But I'll bring up an example from 2007. This is a US Supreme Court case that is one of the first cases actually to debate the role of video. That case was about police officer kind of bumping a car of a driver, a civilian, who the car crashes and the civilian ends up being paralyzed for life. And he sues the police officers for infringement of his Fourth Amendment rights. That is unreasonable search and seizure by the government. Now, lower courts said when we look at the video, when we look at the testimonies, when we look at the facts of the entire case, there are some disagreements about what's happening, and the court should proceed to trial. Let jurors decide the outcome and kind of denies the qualified immunity claim that the police officer wanted in this case. Appellate court affirms the lower court decision. So again, I'm talking about the early 2000s. The Supreme Court, however, in an 8-1 ruling, says the video speaks for itself. Anybody can see it. The driver was driving recklessly. He endangered passengers, other drivers, and the police officer behavior was justified. Now, the Supreme Court was so convinced that everybody would see the same thing that in an unprecedented move, they uploaded the video onto their website, inviting the public to see for itself. Now, scholars, academics love this kind of challenges, this kind of invitations, and they were like, let's see whether the video truly speaks for itself, right? Test it out, run an experiment. And a team of social psychologists run an experiment, and what they found out is that people's identities, so their political affiliations, their race, their ethnicity, income levels, their views of policing in the country, they all shaped how they saw the video and how they interpreted the justifiable or unjustifiable action for the police officer. So I'm talking about early 2000s when we didn't have all the smartphones devices, body cameras, etc. So things today have just gotten more complicated. Yet there are no consistent guidelines for how courts use these materials. Now let me connect this with the killing of Renee Good. So Quinnipiac University national poll of voters in the United States just came out yesterday, January 13th. And actually, they also found some differences. So while majority of Americans, 57% by this poll, actually disapprove of how ICE is enforcing immigration laws, and 53% said that the shooting was unjustified. When you break it down by gender and by party affiliation, things get quite interesting. So, if we look just by gender, 42% of men, these are again registered voters in the United States by Quinnipiac University national poll, 42% say it was justified. Women, 61% said it was unjustified. So I guess I should, 44% of men say it's unjustified. 42% of men say it's justified. With women, it's very different. 61% of women says that was unjustified. So
Well,
we see a bigger proportion of women saying it's unjustified. Now, when we see by party affiliation, this won't be of surprise to anybody. I think the gender dynamics are more surprising in this case. But in terms of party dynamics, 92% of Democrats said the killing was unjustified. Republicans, 77% say it was justified. Independents, 57% say it was unjustified. So we do see those differences. Now, in psychology, there is something called motivated reasoning. So, in other words, we see what we want to see.
yeah.
Right. And we can see that in some senses playing out here, which is why I do think courts who have a truth seeking mission and mission to deliver justice really need to think through the evidentiary rules for video, especially in an age of AI, which we're going to, I know, talk about, because we really need consistency in how video is used as evidence in court, where the standards of evidence need to be much higher than what we have in the public realm.
And it's not just the video; it's how you're seeing the video too. Before, maybe people saw it in the news, and everybody's seen it maybe presented in the same way. And now people might be seeing it being presented by news influencers who are telling them exactly what to think about what they're seeing in the video before they even see it.
And the other dynamic that's so important is that we're seeing this on our phone. So the images are much smaller.
Smaller.
So any sort of inconsistencies are much harder to pick up.
Yeah.
And so that really does also change how we see these things.
There's so much we want to talk about, and there's also people who are on the phones wanting to get into this conversation. So we're going to go to those phone lines. Ken is in Regina. Ken, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you. Listening to this discussion, it makes me think of other things historically that have also been sort of an interpretation or reinterpretation of events. And there's like the photos of the raising of the flag in World War II, the ending of Iwo Jima with the Marines. That was a staged photo, but it looked like it was meant to be a spontaneous event. Or in more recent times, with the downing of the statue of Saddam Hussein, that was also a staged photo and gave an interpretation that the citizens in Iraq were much more supportive of U.S. intervention. So even before before AI's existence, photos have been used to give interpretations of events that are really are not factual. And even in Canada, there was the historic case with Robert Stanfield of him shown kicking a football and flubbing it, but there was actually 10 attempts that were successful before the 11th photo that was taken that showed him looking like he was flubbing the football and would be an incompetent political leader. So we've had this around for a long time, and also historic paintings that are interpreting events that really never took place that way, but it's the artist's interpretation of trying to convey something, a message to the viewer. And I think it's a case now that it's just more insidious the way that we can do that with AI and such.
Ken, great points. Thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you. Take care.
We'll stick to the phone lines. In Regina, we have Chris on the line. Chris, welcome to Blue Sky.
Good afternoon. I'll turn my radio down so we don't have any background problems. I think we've got, if we're focusing on the Renee Good situation, we've got a couple of different issues at play here, or there are potentially two issues. Obviously, the AI and what it can do is a huge threat and challenge, and what we're going to have to do to sort that out remains to be seen. When it comes to the Renee Good incident, it's pretty clear that the Trump administration had its own narrative prepared before it even saw the video. And, the statements that came out from Trump and from Kristi Noem were complete fabrications. There's no question about it. This whole narrative that the officer had been injured, he was in hospital. I mean, it's an absolute lie. And that shouldn't be surprising to anyone who has followed the Trump administration. Donald Trump, it's documented that he has told thousands of lies since he's been president. His whole administration is dedicated to rewriting the narrative, and they've done this with January 6th. He's now spinning that it was the Capitol Police who are at fault for this. He pardoned all of the rioters. It's pretty clear to anybody, regardless. And unfortunately, the Republican Party now in the United States is essentially a fascist cult. I'm going to come right out and say it. It bears almost no resemblance to the historical Republican Party. It's no longer a conservative party. It is a fascist cult. And I think the media needs to be pushing back harder against the Trump administration, because it has gone past the point of saying, well, we've got to have fair and balanced reporting. That administration is so outrageous in its war against fact and truth that the media needs to be pushing back and challenging them at every opportunity, because it is an administration that is wholesale dedicated to misinformation. And I don't think we can continue to sugarcoat this. We have to call it out. We have to call a spade a spade.
Chris, I really appreciate you calling in today.
Thank you.
If there are others who want to join the conversation, you can call 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Brian, there was a lot from Chris there. Is there anything you want to pick up on?
I think it's always important that we, again, place this in the context of what's happened over the last 10 years in the role of social media. This would have been an individual decision. It would have been individual, reaction to a TV or the news. Now you have basically hermetically sealed communities who amplify and sort of then, even if something is fabricated, people don't care. It amplifies your point. And I think what we have to really be aware of, and this is as Canadians as well, is the sort of tendency that, and these social media platforms are basically profiting by the more you send out, the more that we sort of amplify. They are literally...
And they work on rage, right?
Yeah, and the algorithms are designed for engagement. So they want, they're literally designed to encourage this. We always have to kind of take a step back as Canadians and say, before you forward something, are you contributing to that or not? It's designed to get you emotional. And so we each have a role to play in that. And obviously you keep your friends informed, but we really always have to kind of take a perspective and say, what kind of society do you want to live in? How am I contributing this in the context of social media, which is literally designed to amplify these things in order for you to stay engaged and they continue making money.
Well, Sandra, I'm really curious about what you were listening to for that, because you are listening through this lens of living in the States right now, and you're living in this place where 50% of people kind of saw that video in different ways, or 50% of men, perhaps. So tell me what you took away from that call.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to piggyback on something that the first listener said that I think is very important. Yes, it's true. We've always had issues of manipulation, from staging, from cropping, photoshopping, etc. Right? But we also have authentic images that are out there circulating. So I think what's very important is the way we learn how to make arguments with words. When we talk, right, in schools, we learn how to write sentences, how to think, how to talk. What is an argument? What is an opinion? What is evidence? We need to get savvier how we talk about images. In other words, it's not just enough to say, well, see the video, it speaks for itself. Videos rarely speak for themselves, right? Or rather, what they say depends on to whom it is speaking. So we need to get savvier about making arguments with visual materials. And that's why it's very important to say, well, here are all these authentic videos that nobody is disputing their authenticity. When you look at them together, when you look at them in this way, here are the questions you can ask. Here are the questions to which we already have some answers. And here are questions to which we should still be demanding answers, right? So, for example, having seen all the video casting doubt on the official narrative, we should be questioning the official narrative and demanding investigation, demanding the facts to be out there. So I think that's very important that we learn how to be more sophisticated when we talk about visual media, because we spend so much time on words and numbers, but we somehow assume that images are intuitive because they're everywhere on social media, on our phones, etc. But images are not as intuitive as we think they are. And when it comes to highly polarized environments, when it comes to difficult events, when it comes to events when somebody's life ended, we need to also be very diligent and really think critically with these images and making the argument.
And today on Blue Sky, we are asking, is seeing still believing? How is video being used in conflict? And what is the impact of generative AI and people's ability to trust what they see online? If you have thoughts on the topic today, you can call 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. My guests are Brian McQuinn, who's the co-director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence, Data and Conflict at the University of Regina. He's also associate professor at the University of Regina's Department of Politics and International Studies. And Sandra Ristovska. I don't know why I'm having such trouble with your name, Sandra. Sorry about that. Is an associate professor of media studies with a courtesy appointment in law at the University of Colorado Boulder. And she's also the founding director of the Visual Evidence Lab. So today, we've been talking so much about one specific video, but I'm curious a little bit about even how people manipulate video, Sandra, when it comes to, like, you see it from different angles, but you can also see it slowing down, which is different than what people's reality is, right? It's easy like a play-by-play in a football game. It's easy to see what went wrong when something's slowed down. But it's maybe different when you're in the actual moment. Can you talk about how even manipulating the speed of video can impact how we perceive the situation that happens?
You're absolutely right, Nicole. Even, technological features of the video can shape interpretation. So one is playback speed, which you just mentioned. So whether you play a video in regular speed or slow motion, psychological experiments have shown that people who see a video in slow motion assign more intentionality in the depicted action. And proving intent is critical in a criminal case, right? So it can skew, it can shape people's interpretation. And I do think for any of your listeners who are sports fans, they know that when they see, let's say, a fall on a replay, when it's slow motion, things might seem more egregious than they seem when they're just playing out in a regular, normal speed. So that's something we need to be paying attention to. And there is a court case actually in the US, another very famous case with the beating of Rodney King by Los Angeles Police Department officers. When that video was played in court, this was very early, where we didn't have cell phones. We had handy cams. This is early 90s. And a bystander recorded the incident from the balcony of his apartment. And that video became key evidence in a court case, or that was supposed to determine whether the officer acted unlawfully. Now, the prosecutor in this case kept saying, people, believe your eyes. But the defense attorneys who represented the police officers in this case actually played the video in slow motion. They took frames from the video to give a vastly different interpretation. And in that particular case, in at least the first criminal case, the jurors sided with the police officers. So this is why I'm saying that courts needs consistent guidelines. Now, as of right now, there is an appellate court ruling in Colorado where I'm based that says slow motion should not be used. But in other courts, it is being used and it's very inconsistent. So that's just one example of the guidelines. Early on, you also mentioned like what it looks like to see something on a cell phone where you might not, where you might miss some important details. But that's true of any medium. Studies have shown, for example, whether you can see the same incident, everything is the same, but one video was recorded from the dashboard camera of the police officer car, and the other was recorded from the body camera mounted on the police officer. And then people see these videos, it's the same incident, but they assign different intentionality in the police officer's action depending whether they watch the body camera or the dashboard camera. Now, we haven't had an experiment to add cell phones here, but I'm suspecting there might be some differences. So these are just small things that we don't tend to think about that can still shape the ways we see images and particularly video.
Sandra, you started talking about some of the historical cases, including Rodney King, but I'm curious about even George Floyd, which was a more recent example of a time when a video from a bystander really polarized a country, beyond a country. If that video emerged today, do you feel like it would have the same power?
I mean, I think so. And speaking from the evidentiary legal realm, that was not the only video that was used to prove what was then ruled to be a murder in that case. Because what the attorneys did, they used a bystander video, but they also used a body camera footage of the police officer. They used multiple surveillance cameras that were there, and they presented an exhibit where each video kind of corroborated each other. And then they brought in experts to testify, witnesses to testify, etc. The Renee Good killing provides a similar opportunity actually in terms of like the pure technicalities. We also have multiple videos from different angles and perspectives. We have witnesses, we have law enforcement on the scene, so it would be good for there to be proper investigation to find out what actually went on.
We're going to head back to the phone lines. Colleen is on the line in Saskatoon. Colleen, welcome to the show.
Oh, welcome. Yes, it's very upsetting what has happened. I just wanted to add that AI generated video. Back in my day, like I guess so the young end of the boomers, it was said like a picture is worth 1,000 words. But now AI has taken that away from us. Now, the challenge is verifying the authenticity of that information, visual or otherwise. AI-generated photos that are sent in by the public to PD or authorities make the proverbial haystack bigger and longer to determine veracity and achieve justice.
Yeah.
And this is where a lot of the companies who are generating this, it would be very easy to create watermarks and other ways in which this could be signaled. If AI is as powerful to do the things we see, theoretically it should be powerful enough to create ways in which there's watermarks. But a lot of these companies have chosen not to, along with a lot of the social media companies, including Grok and others, who are actively sort of fanning the flames on some of this. It is always important to emphasize the responsibility of the platforms that are involved.
Sandra, I'm sure you have something to add.
Yeah, no, it's an important point, but I want to kind of caution us not to think about authenticity in such, I don't want to say, it's important to know whether an image is authentic or not, right? Like that's number one. But authenticity is not the only things that matter. So I'm currently working on a book that looks at historically how we arrived in AI. And I can tell you multiple examples where we have photographs and videos admitted into evidence. In one case, a guy who didn't commit a crime, this is in the 80s, spent over 13 years in jail and was finally exonerated by DNA evidence. What happened in that case, the police officer manipulated the lighting in the camera for the photo he took of the photo lineup to make him look darker than what he was, so that a witness would recognize him. So we've seen some manipulation. Now, is that image authentic? Yes, it was authentic. It was taken on a real camera, etc. There was something else going on there. So what I want to caution, authenticity is an important first step. But the more we talk about high-tech verification tools as the only solution, again, I want to say they're very important solution, but they're not the only solution. There is a danger. The more we talk about them as the only solution, the more we are risking creating let's say, environment in courtrooms where jurors expect these high-tech verification tools for every piece of video. And in the process, just a simple, authentic video may be given no weight or very little weight in a case. This is what some legal scholars have called the reverse CSI effect, right? When we expect kind of like this high-tech forensic verification for absolutely everything. So that's not where we want to get at. Also, we should be cautious that we should not be doubting just about everything we see, right? With the discussions of generative AI and deep fakes, experts have also warned that we might be entering an era of a liar's dividend. What does that mean? If anything and everything can be dismissed as fake, then it's very easy to lie.
I'm glad that you're going there, because I'm also curious just in the rise of the sheer number of videos right now. We're going to be playing some tape in a second here, because we're seeing videos of conflict between ICE officers and anti-ICE protesters in Minnesota across the states. Here's a clip of an immigration enforcement operation in St. Paul, Minnesota.
You know people hate you. Hey!
So it's probably hard to tell on radio, but essentially it's somebody getting really mad about being videotaped while doing his job. And right now it's sometimes the officers, it's often the bystanders. I've seen so many videos in parking lots and everywhere. So I'm just really curious about, first off, the legality of voting, and just how often people are pulling out a video camera at this point. And what's your reaction, I guess, to people being really upset about being filmed in this case? Should that be expected at this point?
I mean, it depends on the country you're in, obviously.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is, despite a lot of what's been said by the Trump administration, they have recently sent out a reminder to its officers that being videotaped is not illegal. So the fact that they're informing their own officers that this is in fact, part of what it is to be a democratic society and being able to videotape these things, I think is important. From a Canadian perspective, though, I think it's something that we have, and there's a lot of activists who, the power of witness is still there. We have generative AI and generative AI, and I think we should talk about it more as far as the sheer volume. And in many ways, we are in a post-truth world when it comes to no longer, believing anything that you see. But I think both these videos and others do demonstrate the power of what a witness, and that recording can be. And so it's something that is still going to be used by activists or the average person when trying to make sense of the world or witness what's going on. So I think even though generative AI is there and it's really, the sort of AI slop is changing how we see the world, and it will over the next, 12 to 16 months keep getting better, there is still something kind of essential about what it means to witness something despite all of these other changes.
Senator, I'm curious. I know that this might not be exactly your wheelhouse, but I'm sure there are people listening who who are wondering. They're like, I carry a camera in my pocket. If I see something that I identify as what I perceive as an injustice that's happening, what role should I be? What role can my video camera in my pocket play in this? Do you have suggestions? I know that there's a lot of work being done among activist groups on how to properly videotape so that it's actually useful later. Do you have thoughts on that?
And look, here are a few things I'll say. Secret policing is antithetical to democracy, which is why, by and large, courts in the United States have recognized the First Amendment rights of citizens to record the actions of law enforcement as long as they don't interfere with the actions of law enforcement. So actually, in the United States, that's a recognized right. We've had instances. There was a judge in a district court judge in a case in Chicago that put a preliminary injunction. What that means is she heard enough evidence that determined she had to issue a ruling that ICE agents need to stop with certain tactics that were determined to be unlawful in that case. It's a more complicated case that is still playing out in the courtrooms, but there have been some recognition that some of the tactics are, let's say, questionable, or according to some courts, unlawful. So there is that's happening. Watch groups, legal observers is nothing new. That has existed in the United States, that has existed around the world. In the work that I've done internationally with human rights groups, there have been trainings that how you record, if you want your video to end up as evidence in court, is very different than if you're just sharing on social media or news.
How so?
Well, for example, in the conflicts in Syria, some of the training included you have to shoot landmarks that you're not just relying on the metadata to prove your video, but you're actually, if there is a street sign, if there is a particular landmark, I don't know, a mountain, etc., all those things. That terrain is shifting rapidly, and what it means to record in war-torn Syria is very different than what it means to record in the United States. So one thing I'll say, everybody needs to be aware of their own tolerance for risk. And if people are engaging with this, talk to experts and attorneys, get legal advice to know your rights and to know what you're willing to do and what is in your right to do.
I'm going to read an email that came in from Laura in Saskatchewan, who writes, I agree with this critical viewpoint that we need to take our personal responsibilities seriously when forming our own perspectives that aims for sharing truth and authenticity. This must always be the goal. If we want a society that is rooted in truth, it must begin with us. I have 3 children and consistently ask them to question their viewpoints rather than to accept the popular status quo. And we'll go back to the phone lines where we have Steve in Saskatoon. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, I think AI is it's very concerning, and I just know it's not happening by accident. Since last 2 years ago, this whole AI thing just emerged after COVID. It's very weird. It just doesn't seem natural. Just boom, AI. Everyone's supposed to. It is AI, and get used to it. It's coming, and I have to. Nothing that's happening naturally. The companies that are pushing AI into our lives, and I didn't ask for this.
Steve, do you see a lot of AI videos in your world? Do you see a lot?
I can no. I'm not. I'm 19, so I'm not concerned about AI. There's TV. TV's been going a long time, and the TV has producers. It's scripted. It's TV networks. It's another information that we're supposed to absorb and discern. I'm not scared of it. People who are older, I guess they don't know what it is. So I understand their hesitancy and their fear, but hopefully the people younger can help them out. I guess that's my initial thinking.
Steve, when you're like you consider yourself pretty savvy, I guess. What are the things that help you just determine whether something is AI or not when you're watching a video or a photo?
It's hard. Well, I guess my life experience, knowing what reality looks like versus what I see on the internet. First, everything on the internet or on TV is taken with a grain of salt. Right? That's a de facto position. You got a grain of salt, right? Can't believe anything.
Steve,
Everything is, even on TV, in the news, or CBC, NBC, ABC, whatever.
Steve,
what the president says, what Carney says, everything has to be questioned. Everything. That's my take. That's my younger people's take. As millennials, that's what we think. We don't believe anything. We have to discern everything. There's so many avenues that are lying to us, people for different agendas. There's so many agendas going on. Government, corporations, for money. So,
Steve, you brought up a really important thing. So I appreciate you calling in behalf of all the millennials out there too. But Sandra, I mean, I don't know. I want you to respond to what we just heard from that caller.
I mean, I'll say if just a few years ago, we could kind of look at an image and figure it out. Oh, actually, it's one more finger, or that looks odd. So we could just kind of see some weird things and start to suspect, is this AI, etc. AI is getting more sophisticated by the day, as Brian, I'm sure, can attest to this and talk even in more depth. It is dangerous because we have court cases that are unfolding. In one case in September last year, a judge dismissed the case because the judge was able to figure it out. It was a deep fake that was submitted as evidence. But in another case that played out just a month ago, a woman was sent for 2 days in jail because of an AI-generated deepfake image that shows text exchanges that never happened. And it took a while for the courts to figure out what's happening, right? So that's
I pity
where
the courts these days.
Yeah, so that's why the standards truly matter. Well, I agree with Steve that we should be approaching our digital media environment with a dose of skepticism. We also don't want to disbelieve absolutely everything, but there are real reasons why courts need to be concerned about generative AI.
And this is, from our research on disinformation here in Canada, I always sort of bring up the one statistic where 83% of disinformation, and this is on the Russian sort of injecting it into Canada, is passed on by average Canadians. So it is always important to remember that Canadians play the most important role for disinformation being spread. Now, that is both empowering in that you have that choice, and so that questioning where things come from. And as annoying as it might seem, this is where the role of sort of legacy media who do double check and who have entire, staff of people who are checking and fact checking becomes really important. And that the sort of influencer driven world where things just get passed along really quickly without any checking is problematic. And we should be questioning everything and why we are passing something on, because it does make a significant difference to how our society is going to unfold and whether you're informing or disinforming. Because the one important thing is that if you receive a message or a video from someone you trust, that trust of that person transfers to that video or that piece of information. And so you sending something carries with it that trust sort of endorsement and being really careful what we do and how it can be amplifying.
I know personally, when I see a video, I will try and go and find it in another place on a potentially a news site that's been verified, where they verified the news thing before I pass it on. Because I know the instinct right away is to want to share that with all your friends, but you need to do some due diligence, and that's where media literacy comes in here. I want to play another little clip here. Amy Thurlow is a communications professor at Mount St. Vincent University. She spoke to CBC about the importance of teaching media literacy from a young age.
Finland has expanded its media literacy program in public schools. So they have always been, for decades, been a country that pays a lot of attention to media literacy, and mainly focusing on, say, junior high and senior high students, teaching them how to identify fake news or disinformation and how to read media critically. But they have expanded that program and now include elementary school and children up to as early as 3 years old, teaching them how to spot AI-generated material or fake news or disinformation in the media. And what I thought was particularly interesting about that story is their Minister of Education last week said, we previously used to do this because it was important for our individual students, for their own skills, to have this ability, but now we realize it's important to our democracy because we can't protect our democracy without, at a very early age, teaching citizens how to manage the information that they're getting.
You're like louder for the people in the back. Is that what's happening?
No, and this is what we find. Now, the Baltics and Finland is on Russian border, and so the amount of disinformation that Russia pours into the Baltic region is extraordinary. And so for them just to function as a society, but it's happening in Canada as well. We are not immune. Some of the most active networks, political networks in Canada, are deeply and heavily influenced by Russian disinformation on both the far left and the far right.
And I know that you are in contact with different politicians. Like, how concerned are politicians in this province, in this country, about what we're seeing?
I presented some of our research to a number of political parties here in the province, and they are all worried. And it's not just the sort of polarization, it's the extremeness of those polarization, the amount of death threats. And that, again, is why I always sort of talk about having disagreements. Great, that's the basis of society. But the level of language where the other is no longer seen as someone who's a citizen, but is actually existential threat to the very nature of our country. That is one of the Russians' main push, is the idea that we no longer see people who disagree with us as fellow citizens, but as someone who threatens the very fabric of our society. And that is actually something that gets pushed by foreign actors all the time in Canada.
And everybody.
Yes.
Yeah. Sandra, I want to leave you with that opportunity to kind of make that connection between media literacy and a strong democracy.
Yeah, media literacy is vital. As I mentioned earlier, we learn from a young age how to think critically with words and numbers. We don't do that with media. We live in a media-saturated world where that is critical. But I do think that's just one piece of the puzzle. Just like news organizations have developed visual forensics teams to work with this kind of materials, to verify them, to try to present accurate portrayal to the public, courts have a responsibility to think about guidelines and standards for these materials. But I should say tech companies, to return to a point that Ryan was making, they have a role to play here, whether it's through watermarking solutions or certain policies. There's not just one bulletproof solution. There are multiple things that we need to be paying attention because democracy is at stake.
Well, I really appreciate both of you being part of this conversation today. We had some great callers. If people have been listening and they have other thoughts that they would like to add to the conversation, they can email us right now at bluesky@cbc.ca. We've had, it's just some real food for thought. And I know that my producer wants to throw away her phone and go live in the woods.
It's not a bad strategy.
I hope that that's not everybody's takeaway from today's show. Today we've been talking with Brian McQuinn and Sandra Ristovska.